A black man named Elijah was rejected from joining a prestigious country club. 6 months later, something happened that left the employees speechless. What led to this dramatic turnaround that changed their lives forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Elijah Walker stepped out of his sleek black car, his eyes taking in the grand entrance of Green Meadows Country Club. The sun shone brightly on the lush green lawns and carefully manicured gardens. He donned his crisp red polo shirt, feeling a mix of excitement and pride bubbling up inside him. As he walked towards the entrance, Elijah's mind wandered back to his childhood. He remembered the tiny apartment he grew up in, the sound of his mother's sewing machine late into the night as she worked tirelessly to make ends meet. A small smile played on his lips as he thought about how far he'd come. From delivering newspapers to owning the whole darn company, he murmured to himself, chuckling softly. Elijah's journey hadn't been easy. He'd faced countless obstacles, worked long hours, and made tough decisions. But his determination never wavered. He built his business from the ground up, treating everyone with respect and fairness along the way. As he reached for the heavy wooden door of the club, Elijah felt a surge of confidence. He knew his achievements spoke louder than any prejudice or discrimination he might face. He'd earned his place here, fair and square. The cool air inside the club enveloped him as he stepped into the grand foyer. The smell of polished wood and leather filled his nostrils. Elijah's eyes widened slightly, taking in the ornate chandeliers and plush carpets. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist you?" A smartly dressed receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. Elijah returned the smile warmly. "Good afternoon. I'm Elijah Walker. I have an appointment regarding membership." As the receptionist checked her computer, Elijah's mind drifted to all the doors his success had opened for him. He thought about the jobs he'd created, the families he'd helped support, and the community programs he'd funded. It filled his heart with a deep sense of satisfaction. "Mr. Walker, welcome to Green Meadows," the receptionist said, snapping him back to the present. "Mr. Emerson will be with you shortly. Please make yourself comfortable in the waiting area." Elijah nodded his thanks and made his way to a plush leather armchair. As he sat down, he couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging. He'd worked hard for this moment, and he was ready to embrace it with open arms. Elijah followed the receptionist's directions to Mr. Gerald Emerson's office, his polished shoes sinking into the plush carpet with each step. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and knocked on the heavy wooden door. "Come in," a gruff voice called from inside. As Elijah entered, he was met with the stern gaze of Gerald Emerson. The club manager sat behind an imposing mahogany desk, his silver hair neatly combed back, and his lips pressed into a thin line. The office was adorned with golf trophies and framed photos of smiling men on lush greens, all of them white. "Mr. Emerson," Elijah said warmly, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Elijah Walker." He stood slowly, his chair creaking, and shook Elijah's hand with a grip that was barely there. "Mr. Walker," Gerald replied, his voice as cold as ice. "Please, have a seat." Elijah sat down, still smiling, though he felt a knot forming in his stomach. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I'm here to submit my membership application," Elijah said, his voice steady and confident. "I've heard wonderful things about Green Meadows, and I'm excited about the possibility of joining such a prestigious club." Gerald's lips twitched and he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. Elijah nodded, choosing to ignore the hostility in Gerald's voice. "Yes, sir. I believe my business experience and community involvement would make me a valuable addition to your membership." Gerald's eyes flicked to the folder in Elijah's hands, then back to his face. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Gerald cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker," he began, his voice clipped and cold, "I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news for you." Elijah's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. "Oh?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Gerald continued, a hint of satisfaction creeping into his tone. You see, Green Meadows is not accepting new members at this time. We're at capacity, you understand. Elijah's gaze swept around the room, taking in the photos of smiling white men. He looked back at Gerald, seeing the thinly veiled prejudice in the older man's eyes. It was clear that the club's capacity had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with the color of Elijah's skin. Elijah felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. He blinked, trying to process Gerald's words. The air in the office suddenly felt thick and suffocating. I see, Elijah said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. He took a deep breath, willing his hands not to shake as he placed the folder back in his briefcase. May I ask when you might be accepting new members again? Gerald's lips curled into a smirk. I'm afraid I can't say, Mr. Walker. These things are unpredictable. Elijah nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken message. He stood up, smoothing down his suit jacket. Thank you for your time, Mr. Emerson, he said, his voice calm and controlled. As he turned to leave, Gerald's voice stopped him. You know, there are other clubs that might be more suitable for someone like you. The words stung like a slap to the face. Elijah's shoulders tensed, but he refused to give Gerald the satisfaction of seeing how much the comment hurt him. Instead, he turned back with a small smile. Thank you for the suggestion, Mr. Emerson, Elijah said, his voice steady. But I believe in aiming high. Have a good day. With that, Elijah walked out of the office, his head held high. As he made his way through the clubhouse, he could feel curious eyes on him. The weight of their stares pressed down on him, but he refused to let his composure slip. It wasn't until he reached his car in the parking lot that Elijah allowed himself to feel the full impact of what had just happened. He sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping the leather tightly. The sting of rejection and the ugly face of discrimination washed over him in waves. For a moment, Elijah closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the hurt and anger. But then, he took a deep breath, remembering all the obstacles he'd overcome to get where he was today. This was just another hurdle, another challenge to face head-on. Elijah drove home in silence, his mind replaying the encounter at Green Meadows Country Club. As he pulled into his driveway, he let out a heavy sigh. The sting of rejection was all too familiar. Inside his spacious living room, Elijah sank into his favorite armchair. His eyes wandered to the wall of photos and awards that chronicled his journey from a small-town boy to a successful businessman. Each frame held a memory of triumph, but also a reminder of the struggles he'd faced. He remembered his first job interview fresh out of college. The interviewer's surprised look when he walked in, followed by a hasty excuse about the position being filled. Then there was the time he tried to secure a loan for his first business venture. The bank manager's skeptical glance and unnecessarily rigorous questioning still made his stomach churn. Even as his success grew, the subtle jabs continued, the surprise in people's voices when they realized he was the owner, not an employee. The backhanded compliments about being so well-spoken. The way some clients insisted on dealing with his white employees instead of him. Elijah's heart grew heavy as he thought about all these moments. Each one had chipped away at his confidence, making him question his worth. But then he looked at the photo of his parents on the mantel. Their proud smiles reminded him of their sacrifices and the values they'd instilled in him. Success is the best revenge, his father used to say. Those words echoed in Elijah's mind now, igniting a familiar fire within him. He stood up, walking to his home office. Sitting at his desk, Elijah pulled out a notebook and began jotting down ideas. If Green Meadows wouldn't have him, he'd create something even better. He thought about expanding his tech company into new markets, maybe even starting a foundation to help underprivileged kids pursue their dreams. As the ideas flowed, Elijah felt his spirit lifting. He realized that each instance of discrimination had only made him stronger, more determined. This rejection was no different. It was fuel for his next big move. Meanwhile, at Green Meadows Country Club, a sense of unease began to settle over the once thriving establishment. The pristine golf course, usually bustling with activity, now lay eerily quiet on most days. The clubhouse, once filled with laughter and chatter, echoed with an unsettling emptiness. Gerald Emerson sat at his desk, frowning at the latest financial reports. The numbers were undeniable. Membership was down, and revenue was plummeting. He rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of it all. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, his voice gruff with frustration. Sarah, the club's accountant, entered with a worried expression. "Mr. Emerson, the board wants to meet with you. They're concerned about the club's financial situation." Gerald waved his hand dismissively. "Tell them not to worry. It's just a temporary setback." But as he walked into the boardroom, the tension was palpable. The board members sat around the large oak table, their faces etched with concern. "Gerald," began Mr. Hawkins, the board president, "we can't ignore this anymore. Our membership numbers have been declining steadily for the past year. We're losing money fast." Another board member chimed in. "I've heard whispers in the community. People are calling us outdated, exclusive, even discriminatory." Gerald's face reddened. "Nonsense. We're simply maintaining our standards. Green Meadows has always been about prestige and tradition." "But at what cost?" asked Mrs. Thompson, the newest board member. "Times are changing, Gerald. We need to adapt, or we'll become obsolete." Gerald stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Now listen here," he said, his voice rising. "Green Meadows has been a cornerstone of this community for generations. Our reputation speaks for itself. This is just a rough patch, nothing more." The board members exchanged skeptical glances, but Gerald pressed on. "Trust me," he said, forcing a confident smile. "Our prestige will pull us through. We just need to weather this storm." As the meeting adjourned, Gerald strode back to his office, his jaw set in determination. He refused to acknowledge the nagging doubt in the pit of his stomach. Green Meadows would survive, he told himself. It had to. As the weeks turned into months, Elijah Walker's business empire continued to flourish. His company, Walker Enterprises, secured several high-profile deals that made headlines in the business world. Elijah's phone rang constantly with new opportunities, and his calendar filled up with meetings and presentations. One sunny afternoon, Elijah sat in his spacious office, looking out over the city skyline. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he watched the bustling streets below. His hard work was paying off, and his dreams were becoming reality. Yet, even as he celebrated each new success, a small cloud hung over his happiness. The memory of Gerald's rejection at Green Meadows Country Club still stung. Elijah could still see the look of disdain on Gerald's face, could still hear the coldness in his voice. Elijah sighed and turned back to his desk. He picked up a framed photo of his parents, both long gone now. "What would you think of all this, Mom and Dad?" he whispered. "I've come so far, but some things never seem to change." As he set the photo down, a thought began to form in Elijah's mind. Maybe there was a way to turn this situation around, not just for himself, but as a statement against the kind of discrimination he'd faced his whole life. As news of Green Meadows Country Club's financial troubles spread through the business grapevine, Elijah's ears perked up. He leaned back in his leather chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. The club that had so coldly rejected him was now struggling to stay afloat. It was an interesting turn of events, to say the least. Elijah's fingers flew across his keyboard as he delved deeper into the club's financial situation. What he discovered made his eyebrows rise in surprise. The club's circumstances were far more dire than he had initially thought. "My goodness," he muttered, shaking his head as he scrolled through the reports Jenny had gathered for him. Green Meadows membership had plummeted in recent years. Their once prestigious reputation was now tarnished by whispers of discrimination and outdated policies. The club's expenses far outweighed its dwindling income, and they were drowning in debt. As Elijah pored over the numbers, a plan began to form in his mind. This wasn't just a potential business opportunity. It was a chance to make a powerful statement about inclusivity and equality. The more Elijah thought about it, the more convinced he became. This wasn't just about proving Gerald Emerson wrong or getting back at the club that had rejected him. It was about creating real, lasting change. It was about showing the world that success and inclusivity could go hand in hand. Elijah's heart swelled with purpose. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready for it. This could be his legacy, a testament to the power of perseverance, forgiveness, and the belief that everyone deserves a fair chance. Elijah leaned back in his chair, a determined glint in his eye. He knew that to make his plan work, he needed to be discreet. With careful consideration, he began reaching out to his vast network of business associates. First, he called his old friend and fellow entrepreneur, Marcus Chen. "Marcus, I've got a proposition for you," Elijah said, his voice low and excited, "but I need your absolute discretion on this one." Over the next few days, Elijah had similar conversations with a select group of trusted colleagues. Each call was made in private, each discussion held in the strictest confidence. He shared his vision for a transformed Green Meadows, one that would welcome all with open arms. As he worked, Elijah felt a sense of purpose growing within him. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a chance to create real change. He imagined the looks on the faces of Gerald and the other club members when they realized what was happening. The thought brought a small smile to his face. Elijah's team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, gathering information and preparing the necessary paperwork. They moved with caution, careful not to alert anyone at Green Meadows to their plans. "We need to keep this under wraps," Elijah reminded his lawyer, Martha, during a late-night strategy session. "The element of surprise is crucial here." Martha nodded, understanding the importance of secrecy. "Don't worry, Elijah. We're handling this with the utmost discretion." As the days passed, Elijah's plan began to take shape. He could feel the excitement building, but he kept his composure. He knew that patience was key. A sudden, dramatic purchase would have a far greater impact, both on the club's staff and on the broader community. Every night, Elijah would sit in his study, looking over the plans and imagining the future. He pictured a Green Meadows that was vibrant and diverse, a place where people from all walks of life could come together. It was a beautiful vision, and it kept him going through the long days and nights of preparation. As Elijah's plan quietly took shape, the atmosphere at Green Meadows Country Club grew increasingly tense. The once serene halls now echoed with hushed whispers and worried glances. In the boardroom, Gerald Emerson faced mounting pressure from the club's directors. The financial reports spread before them painted a grim picture. "Gerald, we can't ignore this any longer," said Margaret, one of the board members, her voice tinged with frustration. "Our membership numbers are at an all-time low. We need to take action." Gerald's face reddened as he stubbornly shook his head. "This is just a temporary setback. Green Meadows has weathered worse storms. Our reputation will see us through." But the other board members weren't convinced. They exchanged worried glances as Gerald continued to downplay the severity of their situation. Meanwhile, among the staff, rumors began to circulate. Mina, a young waitress, overheard a conversation between two groundskeepers. "I heard there's a big company looking to buy us out," whispered Tom, the older of the two. "Really?" replied Jake, his eyes wide. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Things haven't been great around here lately." Mina's heart raced as she hurried back to the kitchen. She couldn't help but share what she'd heard with her co-workers. "A buyout," gasped Maria, the head chef. "But what would that mean for us?" The news spread like wildfire among the staff. Some saw it as a threat to their jobs, while others dared to hope for positive change. As the day wore on, the air at Green Meadows grew thick with uncertainty. Gerald, oblivious to the rumors swirling around him, continued to resist any suggestions of change. But with each passing hour, it became clearer that something big was on the horizon, whether Gerald was ready for it or not. 6 months after Elijah's rejection, the acquisition of Green Meadows Country Club was finally complete. Elijah sat in his office, a mix of emotions swirling within him. He had achieved his goal, but the memory of Gerald's dismissive attitude still stung. The day had finally arrived for Elijah to meet the staff of Green Meadows. The country club buzzed with nervous energy as employees gathered in the grand ballroom. Elijah took a deep breath, straightening his tie as he prepared for the big reveal. He had kept his ownership under wraps, wanting to make a statement when he finally stepped into the club as its new owner. At Green Meadows, tension hung in the air like a heavy fog. The staff bustled about, setting up for what they believed was just another board meeting. Gerald strutted through the halls, oblivious to the life-changing event about to unfold. "Everything must be perfect," Gerald barked at a young waiter who was arranging water glasses. "We can't afford any mistakes, not with our current situation." The waiter nodded nervously, his hands shaking slightly as he carefully placed each glass. In the parking lot, Elijah's car pulled up. He sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. This was more than just a business move. It was a chance to right a wrong and create positive change. As Elijah stepped out of his car, he straightened his jacket and walked towards the entrance with purposeful strides. The doorman's eyes widened in recognition, but before he could say anything, Elijah put a finger to his lips, smiling warmly. Inside, the staff gathered in the main hall, waiting for the meeting to begin. Gerald stood at the front, his face a mask of false confidence. He had no idea that his world was about to be turned upside down. Whispers and worried glances filled the air, each person acutely aware that their job might be hanging by a thread. "I heard the new owner is some big-shot businessman," a young waitress named Sarah murmured to her colleague. "Do you think he'll keep us on?" Her friend shrugged, straightening his uniform for the 10th time. "I hope so. I've got bills to pay." Across the room, the groundskeeper fiddled with his cap, his weathered hands betraying his anxiety. 30 years I've worked here," he said to no one in particular. "Surely that counts for something." The staff's collective nervousness was palpable. They all hoped to make a good impression, to prove their worth to this mysterious new owner. Meanwhile, Gerald, his usual swagger replaced by barely concealed worry. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, muttering to himself, "It's fine. Everything will be fine. I've run this club for years. They can't possibly replace me." But deep down, Gerald felt a knot of fear in his stomach. He knew times were changing, and his old-fashioned ways might not align with a new owner's vision. Still, he was determined to maintain his facade of confidence. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting time, Gerald took a deep breath and straightened his tie. He plastered on his most charming smile and strode out to join the staff, ready to face whatever changes might come. As the double doors swung open, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the figure silhouetted in the doorway. Elijah Walker stepped forward, his presence calm yet commanding. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, his posture straight and confident. As he entered, a subtle smile played on his lips, his eyes taking in the assembled staff. Gerald, standing at the front of the group, puffed out his chest and prepared to greet the new owner. He had rehearsed his welcome speech countless times, determined to make a good first impression. But as Elijah drew closer, Gerald's practiced smile began to falter. Recognition dawned on Gerald's face, his eyes widening in disbelief. The color drained from his cheeks as he realized who was standing before him. It was the same man he had dismissed so arrogantly just months ago, the man he had deemed unworthy of membership at Green Meadows. Gerald's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His hands began to tremble and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. The shock was evident in every line of his face, his earlier confidence evaporating in an instant. Elijah's eyes met Gerald's, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. The rest of the staff looked on, confused by Gerald's reaction. They had never seen their usually composed manager so flustered. Elijah's expression remained neutral, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes, perhaps a mix of satisfaction and determination. He had waited for this moment, planned for it meticulously, and now it was finally here. As Elijah approached Gerald, the tension in the room was palpable. The staff held their breath, sensing that something significant was unfolding before them, even if they didn't understand what it was. Gerald's fear was evident in his rigid posture and wide eyes. He looked like a man who had seen his past come back to haunt him, and in a way, it had. The consequences of his actions were now standing right in front of him, ready to address the very people he had sought to protect from change. Gerald stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of shock and dismay. His hands trembled as he tried to regain his composure, but it was a losing battle. The weight of his past actions pressed down on him, crushing his pride and leaving him feeling exposed and vulnerable. Elijah, on the other hand, exuded calm confidence as he addressed the assembled staff. His voice was warm and reassuring as he spoke about his vision for Green Meadows. "Good morning, everyone," Elijah began, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I'm excited to be here with you today as the new owner of Green Meadows Country Club. I believe in this club's potential, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you to make it even better." As Elijah continued to speak, Gerald fidgeted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth several times, trying to find the right moment to apologize, but the words stuck in his throat. The guilt gnawed at him, making his stomach churn. Elijah's words washed over the staff, painting a picture of a more inclusive and vibrant future for the club. "We're going to make some changes," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "Changes that will open our doors to a wider community and breathe new life into this beautiful place." Throughout his speech, Elijah pointedly avoided looking at Gerald. The manager's attempts to catch his eye went unnoticed, leaving Gerald feeling increasingly desperate. As the staff listened attentively to Elijah's plans, nodding and smiling with growing enthusiasm, Gerald felt more and more isolated. The dread of what his future might hold under Elijah's leadership weighed heavily on him. Elijah continued his speech, his presence commanding yet warm. He smiled gently, his eyes twinkling with determination and hope. "Green Meadows has a rich history," he began, his voice clear and strong. "But it's time for us to write a new chapter together." The staff listened intently, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Elijah continued, "Our club will become a place where everyone feels welcome, regardless of their race, background, or social status. We're going to tear down the walls of exclusivity and build bridges of inclusivity." He paused, letting his words sink in. Some staff members nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Gerald, still standing off to the side, looked particularly uneasy. "I know change can be scary," Elijah acknowledged, his tone softening. "But I believe in the power of diversity. When we bring different perspectives together, we grow stronger as a community." Elijah went on to outline some of the changes he envisioned. "We'll be updating our membership policies, renovating our facilities to be more accessible, and introducing programs that celebrate diverse cultures and traditions." As he spoke, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The initial tension started to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of excitement and possibility. "But most importantly," Elijah emphasized, his gaze sweeping across the room, "we're going to create an environment where respect is paramount. Every person who walks through our doors deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness." The staff listened attentively, many of them nodding in agreement. Even those who had initially seemed hesitant were now leaning forward, drawn in by Elijah's vision. "I know this journey won't always be easy," Elijah admitted. "Change rarely is, but I believe in the potential of Green Meadows, and I believe in each and every one of you. Together, we can make this club a shining example of what's possible when we embrace diversity and inclusion." When Elijah finished speaking, he turned to shake hands with some of the staff members. Gerald saw his chance and stepped forward, his voice quavering. "Mr. Walker, I need to speak with you." But Elijah simply nodded politely and moved on to the next person, leaving Gerald standing there, his unspoken apology hanging in the air between them. As the initial excitement of Elijah's speech settled, the real work began. Days later, the staff of Green Meadows soon found themselves immersed in an intensive training program focused on diversity and proper guest management. Elijah had made it clear that this wasn't just a suggestion, it was a requirement for continued employment at the club. The training sessions were comprehensive and challenging. Experts in diversity and inclusion were brought in to lead workshops, role-playing exercises, and group discussions. The employees learned about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of creating a welcoming environment for all guests. During one particularly impactful session, Elijah himself shared his personal experiences with discrimination. His story touched many of the staff members, opening their eyes to the realities faced by people of color in spaces like Green Meadows. "This isn't just about following rules," Elijah explained, his voice filled with emotion. "It's about understanding and empathy. Every person who walks through our doors deserves to feel valued and respected." As the training progressed, the atmosphere at the club began to shift. Some employees embraced the changes wholeheartedly, excited about the new direction. Others struggled, finding it difficult to let go of old habits and prejudices. Elijah made it abundantly clear that there would be no exceptions. In a staff meeting, he stated firmly, "Anyone who fails to comply with our new standards or maintains a record of bad behavior will be dismissed. We're building a new Green Meadows, and there's no room for discrimination or disrespect here." His words sent a ripple through the room. The employees realized that their future at Green Meadows now depended on their ability to adapt to these new values. It wasn't just about learning new policies, it was about embracing a fundamental shift in mindset. For some, like Gerald, this was a particularly difficult pill to swallow. He found himself struggling to keep up with the changes, his old prejudices constantly threatening to surface. He knew that his job hung in the balance, and for the first time in years, he felt truly uncertain about his place at the club. Gerald's anxiety grew with each passing day. The weight of his past actions and the uncertainty of his future at Green Meadows pressed heavily on his shoulders. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, watching Elijah from afar, trying to find the right moment to approach him. Gerald's discomfort was palpable. He shifted from foot to foot, his usual air of superiority completely gone. For the first time in his long career at Green Meadows, he felt truly out of place. As the days went by, Gerald's colleagues noticed his unease. The once confident and authoritative manager now seemed to shrink into himself, avoiding eye contact and keeping to the corners of rooms during staff meetings. Despite the obvious changes in his demeanor, Gerald kept his concerns to himself. He was unsure how to navigate this new reality, afraid that confiding in others might somehow make its way back to Elijah and further jeopardize his position. Elijah threw himself into the task of transforming Green Meadows with unwavering determination. Each day, he arrived early at the club, his mind brimming with ideas for positive change. He worked tirelessly, meeting with staff, reviewing policies, and overseeing renovations. The club's stuffy old rulebook was the first thing to go. Elijah replaced it with a new set of guidelines that emphasized respect, inclusivity, and fairness. He personally led training sessions for the staff, teaching them how to create a welcoming environment for all guests, regardless of their background. As the weeks passed, the club's atmosphere began to shift. The once exclusive air gave way to a warm, inviting ambiance. Elijah made sure that the club's decor reflected this new spirit, replacing old portraits of past members with vibrant artwork from diverse artists. Word of the changes at Green Meadows spread quickly through the community. People who had never dreamed of setting foot in the club before now found themselves curious about what was happening behind its gates. Elijah made sure the message was clear. Everyone was welcome. Soon, new membership applications started pouring in. Elijah beamed with pride as he reviewed each one, seeing names and faces that represented the rich diversity of their town. There was Maria Rodriguez, a brilliant young lawyer, Dr. Amir Patel, a respected pediatrician, and Sarah Chen, a local business owner. As these new members joined, they brought fresh energy to Green Meadows. The club's events calendar filled up with a variety of activities that appealed to different interests and cultures. Salsa nights, Diwali celebrations, and Chinese New Year festivities became regular occurrences alongside the traditional golf tournaments. The club's reputation began to transform. What was once known as an exclusive enclave for the elite was now being hailed as a model of inclusivity and community spirit. Local newspapers ran features on the club's turnaround, praising Elijah's vision and leadership. As the winds of change swept through Green Meadows, Gerald Emerson found himself caught in a storm of his own making. The once proud manager, who had ruled the club with an iron fist, now felt like a stranger in his own domain. Each day he watched as the familiar faces of old members were replaced by a diverse array of newcomers, their smiles and laughter echoing through halls that once echoed with hushed, exclusive conversations. Gerald's office, once his sanctuary, now felt like a prison. He sat behind his desk, his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled papers, pretending to be busy. But the truth was, he felt more lost and unsure than ever before. The sound of lively chatter drifted through his open window. Gerald glanced out, seeing a group of new members laughing together on the terrace. Their joy only deepened his sense of isolation. He turned away, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. As he walked through the club, Gerald noticed the staff's wary glances. They had embraced Elijah's vision with enthusiasm, but they treated Gerald like a relic of the past. No one sought his advice anymore, and invitations to staff gatherings had dried up. Gerald's pride, however, remained intact. It was a shield he clung to, even as it kept him from reaching out to others. He couldn't bring himself to admit that he needed help, that he was struggling to adapt to this new world Elijah had created. At night, lying awake in bed, Gerald's mind raced with worries. Would Elijah finally decide he had no place in the new Green Meadows? The thought of losing his position, his identity, filled him with dread. But even as fear gnawed at him, Gerald couldn't bring himself to change, to apologize, to try and fit in. Each morning, as Gerald dressed for work, he felt like he was putting on armor for a battle he was destined to lose. The club he had known and loved for so long was gone, replaced by something he didn't understand. And with each passing day, Gerald felt more and more like a relic himself, out of place and out of time. Elijah sat in his new office, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He gazed out the window, watching the diverse group of members enjoying the club's facilities. A small smile played on his lips, but his eyes were thoughtful. He knew there was still one piece of unfinished business to address. With a deep breath, Elijah picked up his phone and dialed the extension for Gerald's office. "Mr. Emerson, could you please come to my office at 2 p.m.? I'd like to have a word with you." Gerald's heart raced as he hung up the phone. This was it, he thought, the moment he'd been dreading. With shaky hands, he straightened his tie and tried to compose himself. At precisely 2 p.m., Gerald knocked on Elijah's door. "Come in," Elijah's calm voice called out. Gerald stepped into the office, his eyes darting nervously around the room before settling on Elijah. The new owner's face was unreadable, but his eyes were kind. Gerald's heart raced as he entered the meeting room. His palms were sweaty, and he could feel his collar tightening around his neck. Elijah sat at the head of the table, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Gerald's nervous energy. Before Elijah could even open his mouth, Gerald burst out, "Mr. Walker, I'm so sorry for how I treated you before. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Please, I beg you, don't fire me. I know I made mistakes, but I'll do better, I promise." Gerald's words tumbled out in a rush, his voice cracking with emotion. He stood there, trembling slightly, waiting for the axe to fall. Elijah leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Gerald. The room fell silent for a moment, the air heavy with unspoken words. "Mr. Emerson," Elijah began, his voice soft but firm, "I appreciate your apology, but I need you to understand the weight of what happened that day." Gerald nodded, his eyes cast down in shame. Elijah continued, "When you turned me away, it wasn't just about a club membership. It was about being told, once again, that I didn't belong because of the color of my skin." Gerald looked up, meeting Elijah's gaze. He saw pain in those eyes, a hurt that ran deep. "I've faced discrimination my whole life," Elijah said, his voice steady, but tinged with sadness. "As a child, I was called names I didn't understand. As a teenager, I was followed in stores. As a businessman, I've had to work twice as hard to prove myself." Gerald listened, truly hearing Elijah's words for the first time. He felt a knot forming in his throat as the reality of Elijah's experiences sank in. "Each time someone like you turns me away, it's not just a single act," Elijah explained. "It's a reminder of every other time it's happened. It's a message that no matter how hard I work, some people will always see me as less." Gerald's eyes welled up with tears. He had never considered the cumulative effect of such actions. "Your words that day didn't just hurt me," Elijah continued. "They reinforced a system that hurts entire communities. They told every person of color that they weren't welcome here." Gerald nodded slowly, beginning to understand the broader implications of his actions. He saw now how his prejudice had rippled out. affecting not just Elijah, but countless others. I never realized, Gerald said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, Mr. Walker. I truly am. Elijah nodded, acknowledging Gerald's words. Understanding is the first step, Mr. Emerson. Now, we have work to do to make sure no one else feels that way at Green Meadows. Elijah leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. Now, Mr. Emerson, let's talk about the future of Green Meadows. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Gerald nodded, wiping his eyes. Of course, Mr. Walker, what do you need from me? First and foremost, I need your full support, Elijah said firmly. The changes we're making aren't just for show. We're creating a truly inclusive environment here. Gerald took a deep breath. You have my support, sir. I want to be part of this change. Elijah smiled slightly. Good. Because we have a lot to do. We need to revamp our marketing strategy to attract a diverse membership. We'll be hosting community events to showcase our new direction. Gerald listened intently, taking mental notes. He felt a mix of nervousness and determination. We'll also need to retrain our staff, Elijah continued. Everyone from the groundskeepers to the golf pros needs to understand our new values. I can help with that, Gerald offered eagerly. I know the staff well. I can make sure they're on board. Elijah nodded. That's good to hear, but remember, this isn't just about following new rules. It's about changing hearts and minds. Gerald felt the weight of Elijah's words. I understand. And I promise, I'll do everything in my power to make Green Meadows a place where everyone feels welcome. I'm glad to hear that, Elijah said, because the success of this club depends on it. We have a chance to set an example here, to show that change is possible. Gerald straightened in his chair, feeling a new sense of purpose. I won't let you down, Mr. Walker. I'm committed to making this work. Elijah studied Gerald for a moment, then nodded. All right, Mr. Emerson, let's get to work. As the weeks passed, Green Meadows Country Club underwent a remarkable transformation. The once exclusive club began to reflect its new values of inclusivity and respect in every aspect of its operations. The clubhouse, once adorned with stuffy portraits of past presidents, now showcased vibrant artwork from local artists of diverse backgrounds. The walls were painted in warm, inviting colors, and comfortable seating areas were added to encourage socializing among members. Outside, the landscaping was redesigned to be more accessible, with wider paths and ramps for those with mobility issues. The golf course itself remained challenging, but new tee boxes were added to accommodate players of all skill levels. Gerald, true to his word, threw himself into the task of retraining the staff. He worked closely with Elijah to develop a comprehensive program that went beyond mere rules and regulations. The staff learned about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of creating a welcoming environment for all. As the changes took hold, the atmosphere at Green Meadows shifted dramatically. The staff, once wary of the new direction, now embraced it wholeheartedly. They greeted members and guests with genuine warmth, regardless of their background or appearance. Members noticed the difference too. Longtime members who had initially been skeptical of the changes found themselves pleasantly surprised by the club's new energy. New members from diverse backgrounds felt truly welcome, often commenting on the friendly atmosphere. One sunny afternoon, Elijah stood on the clubhouse balcony, surveying the scene below. He watched as a group of golfers, a mix of races and ages, laughed together as they headed to the first tee. Nearby, a family picnicked on the lawn, their children playing with others they had just met. Gerald approached, a smile on his face. It's quite a sight, isn't it, Mr. Walker? Elijah nodded, his eyes twinkling with pride. It certainly is, Mr. Emerson. This is what Green Meadows was always meant to be, a place where everyone can feel at home. As Green Meadows Country Club continued to flourish under Elijah's leadership, word of its remarkable transformation began to spread beyond its manicured lawns and newly inclusive halls. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, intrigued by the dramatic shift in the club's culture and policies. One sunny morning, a reporter from the city's most prominent newspaper arrived at Green Meadows. She was greeted warmly by the staff and given a tour of the renovated facilities. The reporter was visibly impressed by the diverse group of members enjoying the club's amenities, a stark contrast to its former reputation. Elijah, dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy slacks, met with the reporter in his office. His calm demeanor and genuine passion for the club's new direction shone through as he spoke about his vision for Green Meadows. "It's not just about changing rules on paper," Elijah explained, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It's about creating a place where everyone feels truly welcome, regardless of their background." The reporter nodded, scribbling furiously in her notebook. She asked about the challenges Elijah had faced in implementing such sweeping changes. Elijah smiled, his expression thoughtful. "Change is never easy," he admitted. "But when you have a team that believes in the vision, anything is possible." As the interview concluded, the reporter thanked Elijah for his time. She left the club with a spring in her step, excited to share this inspiring story with her readers. The following week, the article appeared on the front page of the local newspaper. The headline read, "Green Meadows, a model of inclusion in the world of country clubs." The piece praised Elijah's leadership and commitment to creating an inclusive environment, highlighting the positive impact on both the club and the broader community. The article sparked a flurry of interest in Green Meadows. Other news outlets picked up the story, featuring interviews with Elijah and showcasing the club's transformation. Local TV stations sent crews to film segments about the club's new programs and diverse membership. As media attention grew, so did the club's popularity. Membership applications poured in from people of all backgrounds, eager to be part of this groundbreaking community. Elijah watched with quiet pride as Green Meadows became a symbol of positive change in the region. Gerald's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. The once prejudiced and stubborn manager had become one of Elijah's most ardent supporters at Green Meadows Country Club. With each passing day, Gerald threw himself wholeheartedly into upholding the club's new values of inclusivity and respect. One sunny morning, Gerald arrived at the club early, a spring in his step that hadn't been there before. He greeted the groundskeepers with genuine warmth, asking about their families and listening intently to their responses. As he made his way to his office, he stopped to straighten a framed poster promoting the club's upcoming diversity celebration. In the staff room, Gerald gathered the employees for their daily briefing. His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as he spoke about the importance of making every guest feel welcome. "Remember, folks," he said, his voice filled with conviction, "a smile and a kind word can make all the difference in someone's day." The staff listened attentively, nodding in agreement. Many of them exchanged surprised glances, still getting used to this new version of Gerald. Gone was the cold, dismissive manager they once knew. In his place stood a man dedicated to fostering a warm and inclusive environment. Throughout the day, Gerald worked tirelessly alongside the staff. He helped the kitchen team prepare for a large event, offering words of encouragement and pitching in where needed. When a new member arrived, looking slightly nervous, Gerald personally gave them a tour of the facilities, his genuine friendliness putting them at ease. As the afternoon wore on, Elijah spotted Gerald patiently explaining the club's new policies to a longtime member who was struggling with the changes. Gerald's tone was kind, but firm, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with respect. Elijah couldn't help but smile, remembering how far Gerald had come. Later, during a staff meeting, one of the newer employees praised Gerald for his guidance and support. "Mr. Emerson has been so helpful in showing us how to make everyone feel welcome," she said, her voice filled with admiration. Gerald blushed, clearly touched by the compliment. One afternoon, Elijah stood at the entrance of Green Meadows Country Club, a warm smile on his face as he greeted guests arriving for the grand reopening event. The club had undergone a complete transformation, both in appearance and in spirit, and tonight was the culmination of all their hard work. As people streamed in, Elijah couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. The crowd was diverse, a beautiful tapestry of faces from all walks of life. There were families with young children, elderly couples, and groups of friends chatting excitedly. The air buzzed with anticipation and joy. Inside, the clubhouse was alive with activity. The newly renovated spaces sparkled under soft lighting, and the walls were adorned with artwork celebrating diversity and inclusion. Laughter and conversation filled the air as guests mingled, enjoying refreshments and exploring the club's amenities. Elijah made his way through the crowd, stopping to chat with both new and longtime members. He listened intently as they shared their thoughts on the changes, his heart warming at the overwhelmingly positive feedback. "This place feels so welcoming now," one woman told him, her eyes bright with excitement. "I never thought I'd see the day when Green Meadows would be a place for everyone." As the evening progressed, Elijah noticed something truly special happening. People who might never have crossed paths before were now engaged in animated conversations, finding common ground and forming new friendships. The barriers that had once divided them seemed to melt away in the warmth of the club's new atmosphere. Out on the terrace, a group had gathered to watch the sunset over the golf course. Elijah overheard snippets of their conversation. They were planning a charity golf tournament to benefit local schools. It was exactly the kind of community involvement he had hoped to foster. Gerald approached Elijah, a tray of drinks in hand. "Mr. Walker," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "I can't tell you how proud I am to be a part of this. The club has never felt more alive." Elijah clasped Gerald's shoulder, nodding in agreement. "We've come a long way, Gerald. This is what Green Meadows was always meant to be, a place where everyone feels welcome and valued." As the night wore on, Elijah found a quiet moment to himself. He looked out over the crowd, taking in the scene before him. The sense of community and inclusivity was palpable, filling the air with a warmth that went beyond the summer evening. In that moment, Elijah felt a deep sense of satisfaction wash over him. His vision for Green Meadows had become a reality, and it was more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. As the evening reached its peak, Gerald stepped onto the small stage set up in the main hall. The chatter in the room slowly died down as people turned their attention to him. Elijah, standing at the back of the room, gave Gerald an encouraging nod. Gerald cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice wavering with emotion. I have something important to say." The room fell silent, all eyes on Gerald. He took a deep breath and continued. "For many years, I stood at the helm of this club, believing I was preserving its legacy, but I was wrong. I was blind to the harm I was causing, the people I was hurting, and the opportunities I was denying." Gerald's eyes met Elijah's across the room. "It took the courage and vision of one man to show me the error of my ways. Elijah Walker taught me that true strength lies not in exclusivity, but in inclusivity." Tears welled up in Gerald's eyes as he spoke. "I want to publicly acknowledge my past mistakes. The discrimination I perpetuated was inexcusable, and I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But Elijah didn't just show me my faults. He showed me the path to redemption. He taught me that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become a better person." Gerald's voice grew stronger as he continued. "The transformation of Green Meadows is more than just a change in policy. It's a change in heart. And I stand before you today, committed to this new vision, ready to work tirelessly to ensure that everyone who walks through our doors feels welcome and valued." As Gerald finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, moved by his honesty and humility. Elijah, beaming with pride, was among the first to stand, leading the ovation. The applause continued, growing louder as more people joined in. Gerald stood on the stage, overwhelmed by the response. Tears streamed down his face as he looked out at the crowd, feeling for the first time in a long while that he truly belonged. As the last guests filtered out of the grand hall, Elijah and Gerald found themselves alone, standing by the large windows overlooking the moonlit golf course. The room was quiet now, a stark contrast to the lively celebration that had just taken place. Elijah turned to Gerald, his eyes filled with warmth. "That was quite a speech, Gerald," he said softly. "You've come a long way." Gerald nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mr. Walker. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one." Elijah placed a hand on Gerald's shoulder. "We've both come a long way, haven't we? From that day you turned me away to now, it's been quite a journey." Gerald looked down, shame coloring his cheeks. I'm still so sorry about that day, Mr. Walker. I wish I could take it back. I know, Elijah said gently, but look at what came from it. Look at what we've built here together. They both gazed out at the grounds of Green Meadows, now a symbol of inclusivity and change. You know, Gerald, Elijah continued, I hope our story can inspire others. Show them that change is possible, that it's never too late to do the right thing. Gerald nodded, his voice thick with emotion. I hope so too. And Mr. Walker, I can't thank you enough for giving me this second chance, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Elijah smiled, his eyes shining with sincerity. That's what this place is all about now, Gerald. Second chances, new beginnings. I'm glad we could start that change together. Gerald wiped a tear from his eye, overwhelmed by gratitude. I promise you, Mr. Walker, I'll keep working hard to make sure Green Meadows stays true to your vision, to our vision. Elijah squeezed Gerald's shoulder. I know you will, Gerald, and I'm looking forward to continuing this journey with you. The transformation of Green Meadows Country Club didn't go unnoticed. As word spread about the club's remarkable turnaround, other country clubs in the region began to take notice. Elijah's vision of an inclusive and welcoming environment had not only saved Green Meadows, but had turned it into a thriving success story. Local newspapers were the first to pick up on the story. They ran features on Green Meadows, highlighting the club's journey from financial trouble to a beacon of diversity and inclusion. The articles praised Elijah's leadership and innovative approach, sparking conversations throughout the community. Soon, larger media outlets caught wind of the story. National newspapers and magazines reached out to Elijah, eager to share his inspiring tale with a broader audience. Elijah, always humble, saw these opportunities as a chance to spread his message of change and hope. In a widely read article in a prestigious business magazine, Elijah shared his experience. He spoke candidly about the discrimination he had faced and how he had turned that painful moment into a catalyst for positive change. The article resonated with readers across the country, many of whom saw their own struggles reflected in Elijah's story. As Green Meadows' reputation grew, so did interest in Elijah's approach to business and leadership. Conference organizers began reaching out, inviting him to speak at events focused on diversity and inclusion in the corporate world. Elijah accepted these invitations, seeing them as opportunities to inspire even more people and institutions to embrace change. At his first major conference, Elijah stood before a packed auditorium. He spoke from the heart, sharing his journey and the lessons he had learned along the way. Change isn't always easy, he told the rapt audience, but it's always worth it. We have the power to transform our businesses, our communities, and ourselves. His words struck a chord with many in attendance. Business leaders approached him afterward, eager to learn more about how they could implement similar changes in their own organizations. Elijah's story of Green Meadows became a blueprint for positive transformation, inspiring others to take action in their own spheres of influence. One crisp morning, Elijah stood at the entrance of Green Meadows Country Club, his heart swelling with pride as he watched a diverse group of new members walk through the doors. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the beautifully landscaped grounds. He smiled, remembering the day he had first come here, full of hope and excitement, only to be turned away. As he observed the scene before him, Elijah couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. The club was buzzing with activity, filled with people from all walks of life. He saw families of different races chatting animatedly, business professionals from various backgrounds networking over drinks, and children of all colors playing together on the lawn. Elijah's mind wandered back to the long journey that had brought him to this moment. The sting of rejection, the determination to succeed despite the odds, and the bold decision to buy the very club that had once shunned him. He remembered the challenges of transforming not just the club's policies, but its very culture. A sense of deep satisfaction washed over him as he thought about the power of perseverance. He had never given up, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. His unwavering belief in his vision had carried him through the toughest times. Elijah's eyes fell on Gerald, who was warmly greeting a group of new members. He thought about the journey of forgiveness they had both undertaken. It hadn't been easy, but Elijah knew that holding on to bitterness would have only held him back. By choosing to forgive, he had not only freed himself, but had also given Gerald the chance to grow and change. As he watched the diverse crowd mingling and enjoying the club's amenities, Elijah reflected on the pursuit of justice. He had turned his personal pain into a force for positive change, creating a space where everyone was truly welcome. The transformation of Green Meadows County Club was a testament to what could be achieved when people came together with a shared vision of equality and respect. Elijah knew that the work was never truly done. There would always be more hearts and minds to change, more barriers to break down. But standing there, watching the fruits of his labor unfold before him, he felt a deep sense of pride in what he had accomplished. If you enjoyed the story of Elijah and Gerald, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.